Okay, welcome to the Garden of Eden. I got a lot of questions asked of me after I did my orchid video about how to take care of orchids. Many times we receive them as gifts and then they flower and then they stop flowering and we think they're dead and we throw them in the trash. Nope. As long as the plant itself is healthy, then eventually it will give off another set of flowers. And so I'm going to take these two orchids that have been in my office for over a year now that have kind of been neglected, and I could use them as an example of how to repot them and get them out of the potting that when they sell the orchids, they sell it in. So when they sell orchids in a nice little pot, they pack it very densely with this moss in order to make sure that they stay damp, since nobody in the store is going to water them. So what you wind up having is a big ball of sphagum moss that traps water, and then you can't tell when it's time to water the orchid because the medium at the top seems dry, so you think, oh, it must need water. And then lo and behold, you've got this horrible root ball that's just dying. So you want to, I'm doing a terrible job of this. Hold on a second. Okay, sorry. I don't have a tripod and the gloves are just too much. So I'm going to get in here and try to do my best with what I've got here. So you basically want to, I know it looks like I'm killing this plant, but you're actually taking all of this extra sphagum moss and getting it so that the roots get to the air. And you can see these clever folks even put an extra little bit of, feels like a cork material, to really hold water. You're basically getting to the roots and getting all of that out. So now we have an exposed root ball and we can go into part two. So what do we pot our orchids in? Well, it depends on what kind of orchid you're working with. And of course, right now we are working with Phalaenopsis orchids. So they do make a specific Phalaenopsis blend. But what's the difference between the Phalaenopsis blend and the quote-unquote special orchid blend that says that it works for Phalaenopsis? Well, the difference is this one has the sphagum moss bits in it. Honestly, I buy whichever one. They're usually about the same price because with the Phalaenopsis, I'm always going to add sphagum moss, which is sold separately, because even the one that has the sphagum moss in it doesn't have enough. So I'll show you what we do. And the hydrogen peroxide is out because if ever you come across fungus or insect, snail remnants, if you see that you've got some sort of a mite on your orchid, you'll want to treat it with the hydrogen peroxide, which I had to do with my Oncidium that I repotted this morning. This had some pretty bad evidence of snail on the roots, and you could see it is not happy, and I've kind of neglected it. So I repotted that and cleaned that up with the hydrogen peroxide, and I probably should have shown you that. Hello. Okay, so I gave that a good cleaning because I'm gonna save that for something else. Definitely not your traditional orchid pot. Your traditional orchid pot really looks something like this. They really need a lot of air to get to their roots, and so I like these types. I'll show you some more. Obviously you can see this one has been very happy in his home. Others do well in clay as long as there's a good looseness to the medium and you don't pack it. That's another good one. This other orchid that was given to me as a gift is not in a good pot at all. There's not even a hole at the bottom. So not an ideal orchid pot by any means. And we're going to repot this one too. So the backyard is a bit of a mess right now. Mark just trimmed the bougainvilleas, so it all needs to be cleaned up. But they look great and they're doing really well. Notice that while I'm working, I've got the orchids in the shade because I'm out in the sun and that would be bad for them. They don't like that direct sun. But take a look at the root ball, right? So it's pretty small. Some of these aerial roots are going to stay outside the pot and we're not going to bury those. So I really just need enough to cover this little area. So let's go. All right. Gotta get a good handful of this and throw that down in there. That's a good base there. And then I'm going to get a good handful of the sphagnum moss. Kind of pack that down. Your roots sitting in that sphagnum moss, and notice that I kept it loose, right? You could wet this stuff and ball it into a really tight wad, and that would certainly retain moisture, but it wouldn't allow your roots of your plant to do very much. So I'm just going to put a little bit more of this to kind of sprinkle, and then let's see how that looks against the roots. Let's look at this for a second and talk about what's a healthy root versus an unhealthy root. So that root right there is new growth. That's a healthy root. These roots here that have like kind of that gray sheath look to them, those are healthy roots. This one that's got like the brown, where you can kind of just see that that's not a healthy root, but it's not a dead root, so I'm going to leave that be. But something like this, there we go, that's a dead root. And look, you know how I can tell? Because it's just coming apart. So you can certainly leave that. It's not going to hurt the plant, but it's just a waste of energy for the plant. So go ahead and snip that right off. Into the trash it goes. And I'm going to leave the rest because I think they're pretty good. But this is real. Oh, I broke this one. Shoot, you have to be careful. So I broke that root, but that's okay. It'll stay intact and keep going. Okay, so I kind of just shoved the plant on top of what we had put in the pot. And now I'm just going to backfill it with some additional potting mix. And I know that I have a desire for orchids to grow straight up and down, right? So I want this to be straight, pardon my nails. But orchids grow the way they want to, and so don't be afraid if it grows at a side angle. You could pot it straight and it will eventually go where it wants to. So that's okay. There's a nice bit of sphagnum from the mix, so I just kind of use that right there like that. And I'm going to throw a little sphagnum on top here. And again, just a nice loose layer so that it'll stay damp but not saturated. And that's it. That's ready to roll. I'm going to set my thing to mist. And nice water. So one thing about why orchids shouldn't be grown straight up and down like I just did is because you don't want water to pool in the crown. So this will eventually grow its own way. But you never want water to sit in the crown like that, because that will rot your orchid. So when you do water it and you're done, see how those roots change that nice dark color when we started watering? So now that I'm done, I'm going to tip it to make sure that all of that water doesn't sit in the crown. And that's it. Last thing I want to point out is, notice that we didn't bury the aerial roots, right? So we only buried the bottom portion of the root ball, and we left these to continue to grow where they want to, because orchids, hi Isabella, like to grow legs. These are aerial roots, and they like to go all over the place. So a healthy, happy orchid will have a good root ball and a good bit of aerial roots. Okay, so this next orchid that we're going to repot kind of had the opposite problem than the other one. The other one was really dense with sphagnum moss and was getting root rot because it was not airy enough. This one doesn't seem to have a whole lot going on in its medium, which is good. But the pot that it sits in, I mean, look at how nice and loose that is. So that's easy, huh? Look at that. Oh, and they shoved one of those cork things on there to keep it wet. So this has got a nice root system, but it's not holding enough water, which you could tell because of the soft, wrinkly leaves. And the reason it's not holding enough water is because there was nothing in there except just dry bark. So, yeah, I mean, there's nothing water retaining about any of that material. And I guess that's why it sat in a pot with no hole, because they figured somebody was going to fill it with water, and I don't know. I don't know what they think when they sell these things. I don't think they care, to be honest. But look, you can see this is not getting enough water. All right, so let's do the same thing. So, as all good gardeners do, we have collections of pots and things left over from other plantings. This is going to be a great pot, except there's no holes in it. And this old plastic thing from the other one will fit nicely in here with enough room that it'll get good airflow once I put some additional holes in it. And it's got enough space that roots will be able to get in between the pot, the plastic, and the clay. So I think I like this, but it needs some modification. And so I'm going to ask Mark to drill a hole at the bottom of the clay pot, and I'm going to poke some holes in this one, and I'll be back. Okay, so not only did Mark put a couple holes in the bottom, I had him put some holes along the sides, and he spray painted it for me, which is awesome. So it's nice and decorative now. So I'm going to go ahead and pot this orchid into, I put holes in the plastic so it'll have plenty of air. So let's go ahead and pot this. So I started with a good layer of bark, and then we'll backfill it with the moss. So because the roots are so scattered, I'm gonna just kind of work this all down in there. Okay, so I got a good bit shoved down in there. I'm going to wet it, and then I'll put it in the pot. Okay, look how nice that drained. It got real wet, and all the drain holes it drained right through. So that's going to be a happy orchid. And in the clay pot, and that's going to be great because now there's plenty of room along the sides inside the pot. You know, there's plenty of space in there that the roots will come out of the plastic and work their way around. And eventually we might even see some roots come out of these holes. But that's going to be a happy orchid, and that's going to sit on my desk. So, very good. So along the bottom of the orchid basket, I had 2 more baskets that needed to be filled. And I now have the orchids that I need to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I started with a layer of some moss and now the bark. And I'm going to put this orchid, and this orchid into that bottom tier. Okay, I'm going to start with this one. This is a good healthy orchid. It's very difficult to do with one hand, so envisioning what this is going to look like in the basket and the fact that it lays on the bottom, I want to set this so that it's going to be able to continue to lay at an angle so that the flowers come out off the sides. Okay, it's kind of a rough draft there. We'll get the other one. And I think I'm only going to be able to fit 2 since this one's pretty big and the other one's pretty large too. So this is a beautiful white orchid that was given to me for my birthday. And you could see it's got some good healthy root. But you can see it has been sitting in water because that pot that it came in doesn't have a drain, and it is completely packed with sphagum. So the bottom roots got a little root rot. So I'm going to pull this apart and get it ready. So here is an excellent example of healthy, clean roots versus dry, rotted root, and these are just really bad. So I'm gonna cut all of this away. You can kind of see it has like a string to the root, and this is just the casing. So I have to trim all that away, but definitely this is an orchid that's getting repotted just in time because it was starting to get really bad. I mean, look at how thick they pack this stuff in here. Ugh. You just kind of go in here and cut away these dead roots. Okay, so really, when you look at the before and after of this, look at how much I cut away. That was just dead root. And so people ask, well, why do you have to cut the bad roots away? Won't they just die off? Well, it sucks a lot of energy out of the plant. So you can imagine this whole big plant is being sustained by this small little cluster of roots, and it's still healthy enough that it was putting out new good roots. But we're going to give this thing a much better chance now. A lot of people ask about when the spike ends, right, and your flower is done flowering. where do you cut the spike off? So let me use this as an example to show that. And you're going to go right down here to the very tip, to the base. There's one. And right here. And whoops. And don't drop your orchid on the floor because you're only using one hand. So that's it. That's our little plant right now. And we're going to put that right in here. So, and again, I want to make it so that it's going to grow outward, right? Because when these are in the baskets, they can't go straight because then they'll run into the basket ahead of them. So you want to give them a little bit of room. Right, Isabella? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to build up this little corner here with the little sphagum. And a good handful of bark. So I built up my little corner, and I'm going to kind of position the orchid like that, and then I'm going to backfill. So see there, I built up the corner, and now I'm going to fill in the rest. Fresh bag of sphagum, and just dropping that down on there. Watch what happens when I water this now. So what happens is that the sphagum really starts to get mushed down in there. Oops, I broke a piece of a good root off. That's not supposed to happen. So now I'm going to add a little bit more. So, and again, as this soaks, it gets compacted. That's why I said earlier, if you take a big ball of sphagum moss, you can actually clump it down into a ball, a tight ball. And that's what growers do because they know no one's going to water their plants at Publix to keep them fresh while they're waiting to be bought. But we don't want to do that because we water ours. So, and there you have it. I just put that right down in there. And these got a little beat up while I was doing it, but they're still very pretty. And that white one will eventually flower again. Ta-da!